Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be reviewing the Scarlet and Violet set review, and also having a look at how these cards might be adapting with the new set Paldea Evolved. That set review is coming very soon. I'm getting it finally prepared, but there is still time for you to have your community ratings on there as well. I'll try and leave a link in the description below, so have your say on those cards before it comes up in our video, and it also helps us out because I think it's great to get more data points out there, because there are certainly times that you'll see today where I may have missed things, and yeah, getting more perspectives is always great. So the ratings are here, and if you want to pause now and have a look at them in greater detail, you can go for that. But let's get into the cards. We're going to start off with Arven. We rated 4 out of 5 initially, and it seems like a lot of the community were in that sort of similar boat, that sort of between 3 and 4. I think it's mostly not featuring in Mew, although it can, and I think it mostly is featuring in Miraidon, which was the other deck that we were sort of hyping Arven for. And one of the more recent top 8ing Miraidon lists with Flaffy played as many as 3 copies, I think it was, so it's done pretty well there. It's also a bit of a staple in the Block Lax deck as well, which I know is very fringe, but it again just sort of outlines that this is something that you can rely on, gives you decent search for items in the opening stages, and we know that the likes of Battle VIP passes for good openers is always important. There's a good amount of Forest Seal Stone around as well. So I do think that Arven's going to continue to see like that sort of fringe play, that maybe card in sometimes Gardevoir, sometimes Mew, as well as Miraidon. I don't really think that changes too much. We are getting a slightly better tool from this set in the Charm of Courage, and that again could mean it ends up going into Gardevoir decks if you're trying to play Drifloon plus Charm, or it just becomes more important in Miraidon because it gives you a tanking tool as well as your generators. So yeah, I think 4 is a pretty fair rating for this one. On to Jacques. This was obviously a poor card. We have better ball search, we have Burnett to help out Lugia specifically, and we have good enough search cards already for the evolutions that we already have in the game. Katie is also obviously terrible, it ends your turn. We have Miriam, which we rated 4 out of 5. I think that's also quite fair. It actually ended up going into less decks than I expected. I thought this was going to be better than Clara in some builds of Lost Zone Box, and that just wasn't the case. Most people just wanted that immediate access to the Clara, even if it just gave you an energy to hand and then bin with Greninja straight away. It just seemed to almost act as that +3, or sorry, the draw 3 that you get from Miriam at times anyway. So yeah, it seemed like Clara was the better option for Lost Zone players, but of course this did see play as like a guaranteed one of, I suppose, in Gardevoir EX decks, which had performed quite well. We are getting Super Rod in the next set, so I'd expect Miriam to have a real downtick in play. Probably not 0 play altogether, because it is still a powerful effect in terms of how many Pokemon you can get back just for one slot in your deck, especially for Stage 2 decks, and as more of those sort of come into the woodwork, I would expect Miriam to see more play, even if it is going to be that one count alongside Super Rod. But I do think for at least Lost Box players, and even some Guardy players, will just completely cut Miriam now and go down the Rod route, which I think is completely fair, because at the end of the day, drawing 3 is still not that high value, and we have better ways to recover Pokemon now. On to Penny. We rated 3 stars. I think it's probably fair to increase this. Now, giving myself some slack, we couldn't really foresee that the Morwile Tech card was going to be this thing, I suppose, and it only really cropped up because we weren't seeing any switch cards in decks. So this was definitely one of those crystal ball situations where I'd formulated my own deck lists but hadn't done that next step of how do I punish the deck list that I have created by having this strange Morwile Tech inclusion for exactly a couple of decks. So I can't really begrudge myself for not rating it higher for that purpose. But that being said, it meant that Penny was pretty good in Guardy decks, and it also gave you upside of having things like Zacian in the opening stages to be those punching bags that you can pick up and undo damage from Cram or Sable and stuff like that. So that's a pretty good inclusion. Similar story for Lugia, where you needed to have a answer to Morwile, and it's pretty much split down the line between Penny and Thornton. So it seems pretty reasonable there. The one thing we did sort of highlight was their were possibilities for this to be the basis of a pick up and put down stalling sort of style approach. And it was Sander that was playing Mimikyu as well. It was something that he outlined in tweets many months ago, so it's not like we were catching on to something before anyone else. This was already like a known combination, and it ended up doing quite well for him at the EUIC at the very least, so not too shabby there. One thing I will note is that, of course, we are gaining that Charm of Courage once again, which means that tanking with basic Pokemon could be more viable as a strategy in general if there are a number of decks that can't hit a certain hit point threshold. A Penny loop with Charm of Courage and maybe like attaching a V-Guard each turn and something like that could just be more of a thing. So I would expect Penny to continue to see play, even if it is going to be that sort of niche one-of index, to continue to give you outs to Mawile, because at any point in the format, if it's not being respected, it could make a comeback. So I think, yeah, probably 4-star is the more appropriate rating for this one. Looks like the community got this one slightly more right than me. Onto Team Stargrunt. Not a great card, obviously, and the way we have so much acceleration right now, all of the best decks, apart from Mew, have insane acceleration. We have Archeops, we have Mirage Gate, and we have Gardevoir EX, so putting one energy back on top of their deck doesn't really stop any of these decks, and even doing it to Mew, because it's like, you know, you can just reattach or whatever, and if you really had to, you could play like Silene Palpad for extra resource recovery, so fortunately, fingers crossed, cards like Crushing Hammer and Team Stargrunt are at an all-time low right now. It's not the way that we can sort of trap people and create stall decks, and I hope that's going to continue to be the case. We get another Rain Dance deck coming in the format with Chem Power Baxcalibur, so you're also not going to be phased by hammers and whatnot in that deck. So it makes me feel like this won't see any play anytime soon, so happy to give this the 1-star. Generator, we did rate 5 stars, and Miraidon's still going to be that sort of if and but deck. I think it's more fair to give this the 4-star rating, even though Miraidon has had some big top 8s, you know, top 8 at EUIC and a number of regionals, so and of course won a big Champions League, so I think it's fair to call it a contender in the format, and Miraidon's definitely like among the top 10 of decks, but it definitely isn't a top tier archetype, I don't think. So I think it's more fair to give this a 4-star rating. I think Miraidon in general is still pretty okay next set. I think it's more likely that a Flaffy build will take control because you want to have some on-board presence that helps you play around Iono. So I think a Miraidon, Raichu, Flaffy sort of toolkit is going to be probably the most successful Miraidon going forward, but they can take advantage of the Charm of Courage and a couple other cool cards along the way. So yeah, we're going to drop this down to the 4-star rating, but it is the thing propelling Miraidon and making it a deck in the first place, so I can see why people would give it the 5-star, and that's obviously how we started, and it's going to continue to be versatile. I don't think there are many interesting lightning-type attackers in the next set. I think Bellybolt EX is probably one of the only targets we could think about, which offers a paralysis option on a 2-prizer, which is kind of chunky as well, but I don't think it's going to be that important or is going to make it into many Miraidon lists. Picnic Basket, we gave the 1-star. Pretty sure it didn't make it into anything. The Gardevoir players didn't need this. Hisuian Zoroark never really kicked off, so there was no need to have this like funny tech card inclusion. And for Mew players, if they did want to tech for Lost Zone players, it was the likes of Crystal Cave or the likes of even things like Volo or Penny coming into their own deck list to pick up their Genesect and whatnot. So I think that's still going to be the priority over this card, and I think that's going to be the case going forward as well. If you are on a budget and don't have Champs Festivals, I suppose if you want to play a Drifloon combination, you could try Picnic, but it's probably not worth the space at that point to really make a very convoluted combo for a card that's very slow. So yeah, Nestball, obvious 5-star. It's in pretty much most decks. And yeah, it's going to continue to be a staple. Not much changing there. Defiant Band, we gave that 2-star. I think it's crept into a percentage of Zard builds of Lost Box. That's the only sort of credence I'll give this card, but yeah, it's really not hit the ground running too much at all. There's still Choice Belts in decks. There's even been Cleansing Gloves making it over other damage mods right now, and that is really an indication that this card isn't all that great. We're getting much better comeback cards in the next set as well, so you probably don't want to shove too many comeback cards all in one deck unless you're deck is specifically geared to like giving your opponent prize cards. So I feel like this card's going to continue to be very fringe, probably continue to be around that sort of 1 and 2-star, and the community was very overblown on this one. Turns out it's better to just be ahead in the Pokemon TCG right now. That might be changing though with Iono and Reversal Energy, but that would actually dissuade you from adding Defiant Bands to your deck list, because if you're already playing Ionos and Reversals, you don't want to have a critical mass of cards that are only good when you're behind, right? You'll end up just having too much dead weight throughout the game. Rock Chestplate, yeah, the fighting deck wasn't ready, and I think now that we get Charm of Courage, it's going to completely make Rock Chestplate irrelevant, so will continue to be a 1-star card. Beach Court was that obvious 5-star in most lost boxes in high counts. Well, it's definitely in high counts for Charizard builds. It's sometimes mixed with Pokestop in some gate builds. Yeah, the Gudra decks play it, the Tina decks play it, Miraidon plays it, as you can see. So yeah, very versatile, very, very strong card, and is having to fight against Artisan coming out in the new set. So I think there might be a sort of splintering off of a number of people going for Jet Energy Artisan versus no Jet and just having basic energy cards, and Beach Court. I think that's going to be how the Lost Zone box decks sort of adapt based on where they want to commit their spaces and how many colorless energy are in their different attacking toolkit of Pokemon, etc. Mesagoza, this was kind of the biggest flop, I think, from our choice. When we were testing Lugia, at this point, we were playing Towers in our single strike build, thinking that that was better than having coin flips. And yeah, it turns out coin flips is the better way to go for a more reliable way of getting your Lugia V and V-Star. The big upside of this card, of course, is that if you do access Lugia V-Star and attack with it, you can bump them as it goes yourself, so you're actually not giving the opponents the potential coin flip to get themselves into the game or get an extra piece for free or whatnot. So yeah, it just seems to be important enough for Lugia to have a stadium bounce, and there aren't any that give a better upside. So I think that continues to be the case. Possibly there will continue to be single strike builds that can play Towers as well. I know there has been still a number of those around, but it seems like Mesagoza is definitely the better one. So I'm going to bump this up all the way to 4 stars as a very probable include in Lugia, which is one of the top decks. I'll still never believe it. It's a worse Pokeball still, but is good enough for exactly this one archetype. And you can see there was a real smorgasbord of ratings there overall. So the people who were believers, well played to you. So in summary, pretty close on pretty much everything. Maybe a slight overestimation of Generator and a real miss on Mesagoza. I'd seen it in Japanese list and I just couldn't bear to believe it, and it turned out to be the better way to go, which is pretty insane. I still won't get my head around it with Lugia. Onto the EXs then. Spidops will probably push down to 1. The sort of trapping Bennett combination was never really worth it, and the Leafeon build, you know, we don't actually have that good evolution bull search, so getting like a swarm of stage 1s is actually quite difficult right now, because you end up having to play things like Mesagoza and capturing Aroma and stuff, which not many decks can afford to do. So yeah, this is still a frustrating card. I think we are getting retreat cost increases further down the line as well from a stadium, so maybe there's still time for this card, but I'm going to put this down all the way to 1 star because it's failed in the homes that I expect, and I don't think anything new comes out that makes me want to change that idea. Again, we might have to just lie in wait for more good ball search for evolutions. Arcanine, yeah, definitely was that 1 star. Too convoluted, too many stage 1s required to make this deck happen. Gyarados, obviously poor, his attack cost was stupid. Ampharos, so we've only just recently been able to play with this card, and seeing as we have started to see some flaffy success, I might want to give this some sort of credence, but it's not really fair to rate this card because it hasn't really had enough of a life cycle just yet. But for now, I think I'll give it like a 2 stars. Like, well, at least Flaffy's playable. Sometimes people will splash this in as a one-of. Magnezone, am I ever going to give this more than 1 star? Probably not, right? I know some people have experimented with it, but not to any real success outside of like online stuff. Yeah, I'm glad that I highlighted the Magnemite being important though. That's real knowledge right there. Yeah, I think we can keep this at 1 star. Miraidon probably is just going to be a 4-star deck. It's not the very tippy top tier deck. It's just very fine and can play into most decks just because of its speed and power. But yeah, it feels like going forward, I've said a few times now that the Flaffy build is probably going to be superior to the Regieleki build because I think it plays better off the board, and I think that's really important in an Iono format. But next, we can go all the way down to 1-star. There's always item lock believers, and we were right to be skeptics of this one, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. Even though it's a psychic type and we have some great psychic type support, and there was the option of this Painful Spoons trap deck, I just don't think it's going to do any good. So yeah, we can drop this down to the 1-star. Gardevoir. Now, this is a really interesting one, right? Because it obviously won the internationals in this format. But then has pretty much been wiped off the face of all top cuts because essentially the lost boxes came back in droves and are really sort of stamping this deck down. So I feel like this is still a great point earner deck, and I think it's going to be fine. So if you want to argue with me between the 4 and the 5-star, you can. I feel I wasn't that wrong with a 4-star. It's just Tord is Tord and can win a tournament with a deck that draws lots of cards because he can navigate the opening hands well and just do the best of large hand sizes and built a more consistent build than most people or most lists that I'd seen up to that point. So you can see where we were coming from here. We pretty much nailed most of the combinations. The Zacian on the screen, obviously. The Greninja there. I've always been standing Festival, and it feels like over and over again I'm keep banging the same drum, and I'm never right about it. But there you go. And I think Gardevoir gets even better next set because it gains Iono and it's a slow setup deck, and it gains Reversal Energy, which works insanely well with Shining Arcana, Guardi, and Gallade if you want to add that into your deck list as well. So yeah, really, really powerful deck. And I think it definitely becomes top tier next set. So maybe I should give it 5 for that and the nod that it did win an internationals, I suppose. And it's one of the decks that's like, it's so powerful that even if it's not the best deck, we'll have to constantly respect it because of how many decks it beats outside of Lost Box. So it's going to continually make Lost Box remain the most popular deck, I think, at tournaments, just because this deck exists, essentially. Mimikyu EX really does suck, and I think there are better ways to answer a low-end Vulpix, which we now know about, of course. And essentially what I was saying on the screen was it's outclassed by the V Pokemon because they can use Sky Seal Stone, and that's still going to be the case. So yeah, this is terrible. Great Tusk, terrible. Yeah, we knew the Koraidon deck wasn't going to work. We gave this 2-star. I think there was not really even any experimentation. I think the good news for Koraidon players is if you already have your Koraidons and you like playing the fighting stuff, you can play it with Ting Lu now. So I think in future, it's looking a lot brighter for Koraidon. It's actually playable now, which is great. But yeah, very powerful effect. But now we have much more support for it coming out from Squawkabilly as well, so it's going to be more reliable next set. Lucario, terrible. Toxicroak, terrible. Treads, terrible. Oink. Wow, there were some people giving this even higher ratings than us, I suppose. Yeah, 1-star, I think it's done terribly, and there's no reason to really play this. So for the EXs, we were probably a little like high on Miraidon, low on Guardi, but you could argue the ratings that we gave were fairly accurate thanks to their performances, and we were basically just too high on Oink there, essentially. Onto the single prize stuff. Arboliva, yep, 1-star. Armarouge, yep, terrible. Is there any reason to like this next set for fire stuff? No, not really, I don't think. There's Skeledirge, but if it's too clunky to work with Arcanine, it's obviously not going to work with Skeledirge either. Dondozo, we rated 2-star, was a believer of the big basic. Always have your eye out for a big basic. And we do have Squawk now to help us bin Tatsugiri a little bit faster. So I low-key want to try out Dondozo again next set, but for now we have to give it the 1-star status. There was a meme going around on PokeStats Live that people were reporting that they had lost to Dondozo or were playing Dondozo. And it actually tricked some of the commentators at the EUIC thinking that it had made a day 2 when it hadn't, which was quite fun. But I think that's the only nod that we've had to Dondozo so far. Slowbro, yeah, 1-star. I think that's very fair. We are getting a Slow King EX next set, so possibly if you're thinking of adding a Slow King package to your deck, maybe you play like a 2-1-1 line incorporating an EX and a Slowbro. Just a small thing I was thinking about there, because we actually have some interesting... We also have the Slowbro, the Twilight Inspiration one that can take 2 prizes for 2 colorless, so maybe there's a hope at some point, but right now it's not really worth it. Quaquaval, obviously gets the EX next set, so we can try that as an attacker, but I don't think it's going to be good enough. As a quick spoiler, you don't really have enough payoff to try it. But yeah, still an interesting card nonetheless. Wug, obviously terrible. We are getting reversal energy though, so we have an easier way of just attaching to our Wug and getting our attack in. So now we don't need to get quite as many stage 1s up like on the second turn of the game. So now it's just down to those coin flips. You'll love to see it. Patchy, going down to that 1-star, I don't think any of the Miraidon decks needed this single prize attacker. I think most just stuck with having Flaffies and like Greninja as their only single prizes that they could like throw into the active if they were roped or something, but outside of that they just stick with the bigger stuff. Houndstone, yet 1-star. Klefki continues to be that really interesting card where it's still not just hit those heights, but there are still some Guardy keys going around and still making day 2s. It never quite made it in Miraidon. I think people have decided that cutting it and just going more streamlined was the better way to go. And Zorak never really was a deck. So I think 4's probably a little bit high. Probably going down to 3 is more fair because there are still Guardy builds of... Klefki builds of Guardy with Mewtwo, of course, to try and be frustrating for the Lost Zone decks. I think in general this actually could continue to go down in play because Lost Boxes in general get answered by Iono in decks so much more that you don't need these like hard tech cards quite as much. But yeah, still powerful effect, but never really found that home. It turns out just you drawing better with, you know, things like Mew and Radiant Greninja are just more important than trying to brick both you and your opponent. Annihilate 1-star, we are getting that Annihilate EX, spoilers, so that could breathe some life into this card. Right now it's being completely outshone by Radiant Charizard, which is an easier rinse and repeat package for 250. This can deal higher damage output, it's just still lacking that early game pressure, and maybe the Annihilate EX can provide that, who knows. 1-star for now though. Hawlucha, we gave that 4 out of 5, I think it's very fair. There's enough Lost Box in the format that you had to play Hawlucha, because if you weren't playing it you could lose mirrors, and I also think it was good enough into Lugia because they had 130 hit point basics in Stonjourner and Yveltal, so sometimes you could rope Hawlucha, Sableye, finish off a 1-prize Pokemon in a turn. So yeah, important card, pretty much a staple in most Lost Boxes. So maybe even worth the 5-star, honestly, because it was so like guaranteed in so many of these. We'll stick at 4, but it's like a very, very common tech inclusion. Lucario, we can, keep the 1-star. King Gambit, obviously, it's a stage 2. Rev of Room, this is an interesting one as well. People had much higher hopes of this card, and we were kind of on the lower end, but even then, it's not seen any play. But Barrel's made it, you know, still in force, and still seeing a ton of play with Arceus. But the Rev of Room, just not quite getting there. Seeing as though, if you need energy discard synergy, you've got Greninja already in the format, so you have that covered with your little basic Radiant instead. And I think with Iono, Rev of Room is just annoying, right? Because sometimes you're going to get hit with Iono and just miss your energy out, and then it's just useless, whereas Barrel's always going to be there topping you up. And we've seen the Squovert now, which just means that you see so many cards with just one Barrel in play that I think Rev of Room is going to continue to just be not very popular. Mouseholder's obviously terrible. Squovert, I can't believe I didn't believe in you. So here's the thing. I was so hyped about Lost Zone that I thought that Squovert was always going to be this liability card. But then there's the classic, but in every other matchup, this card is so, so good that it's worth it. So yeah, we're going to bump Squovert up to 4 stars as being a probable... Well, it's almost a staple in Arc Tina decks, which, you know, has done very well in recent tournaments. So yeah, all the way up to 4-star will continue to be in every Barrel combination. And I think Barrel gets stronger next set. It could end up being in some Chien-Pao Baxcalibur decks, although I don't think Squovert probably is going to be. But yeah, just having Barrel in general is a great Iono-proofing mechanism. So Barrel Squove is another big selling point for Arc decks to continue to see a ton of play. So yeah, the future's bright for Squovert. So yeah, that's the ratings. I think maybe just slightly too generous on Rev of Room and really undersold Squovert. So I guess those are the kind of big takeaways there. But overall, not too bad this set. I think when Mezagoza was my biggest flop, and it's objectively a Pokeball, I'm pretty okay to concede that one. and just not see the lines fully. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I hope you're excited for the set review. Get involved once again. Follow the link in the description. It really does help us out to get the opinions of the masses as well as our own, because as you can see, we can misfire sometimes. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.